Hi.
Hello.
Welcome to the Mystic Sisters podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I feel like we need to do a little intro of you.
Yeah.
Who you are.
Who is this person?
Who are you?
Who am I? That's the great question, isn't it?
It is.
So my name is Tyler James Berger, and I am a jack of many trades.
It's true.
I'm a parkour athlete. I'm a podcaster. I've studied psychology and evolution, and I'm really interested in the kind of intersection of religion and evolution and creativity, and how a kind of art and the human creativity can kind of be a very powerful tool for our own evolution. And now I'm here talking to the Mystic Sisters.
Yes. We haven't really had a lot of guests. So
We haven't had any guests. We have a moderator named Jacob.
We have a moderator, yeah.
But now
now we have our
Tyler.
first guest.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this because I think we don't even really know what we're going to talk about or where it's going.
No.
So it's going to be something new for all of us.
But we've
I
been
think.
talking all weekend.
We've
And
been
we're like, we
talking
should be
all
recording
weekend.
this.
Let's
When we're
record
all
it.
together, we're all like,
Yeah.
and
yeah.
it's like, this should be a podcast, so let's just record one. So
Yeah.
Hey, cheers.
Oh yeah,
Cheers.
cheers.
Boink.
Boing.
Good times.
Yeah,
Excellent.
I'm excited to explore some of these subjects with you guys because you're both artists in your own right, and you think deeply about kind of art and also kind of a political bent on these things, like how kind of pop culture issues kind of creep into our art and creativity, and how that affects culture at large as well.
Yeah, sort of like the dominant like political ideologies.
Yeah.
Like they seep into our world in ways that I think a lot of people don't understand. Right?
Yeah, if you go to
architecture, art, culture,
Music.
styles of dress, all of it has this like root in what we think about religion, which
Yeah.
I think has roots in what we think about God
Yes.
and life, and so,
If you go to the bottom of almost any issue, you hit like a theological bedrock.
Yes.
Yes.
That almost all issues kind of stem from.
Yeah.
And you could call it theological, you could call it mythological, you could call it psychological.
Yeah.
But there seems to be like you can go kind of vertically down on any of these issues, and you get to like this common core.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm interested in
the
exploring.
questions get bigger, right? Like,
Yeah.
where at first it's like, oh, like how high should the minimum wage be? And that starts to be like, how much should government really do? Or
What is
how
the
little?
value
What
of
is
human
the-
time?
Yeah, like all these things. But then you go deeper and deeper, and it's like, what's the value of life? Like, where did we come from? Why does it? Why does anything matter? Like,
Yeah.
right? Like you get
Yeah.
like deeper and deeper into the questions, and then you're at a theological root, and ultimately confronting what you think about God and life and humanity, right?
Right.
And then also at the bottom, I think something that that kind of comes out a lot is whether or not you think that the material realm is like all there is.
Yeah.
Because then you can start to want to like pull the strings and be like, well, if we just get the government to do this and this and that and pull the right levers, everything can be equal, right? But if you have an idea of like creator and created, and there's an inherent hierarchy in the universe and in the world, then you start to maybe think a little bit differently about how humans ought to order themselves, right?
Yeah.
And structure our society.
Yeah.
Right.
I think you touched on something really interesting there, which is when people approach reality from a materialistic perspective. And I think a lot of what we're experiencing in our world right now is kind of like the fallout from that. When you kind of go too deep into the materialistic, almost like Newtonian worldview that doesn't take any kind of transcendent value into account, you kind of get some cultural degeneracy, I think.
Right.
You know, or you begin to not pay attention to things that do exist and do have profound influence over us. And just because you don't pay attention to these things doesn't mean they don't have a tremendous power over the way we live our lives.
Yeah.
They aren't there. And so now I think people our age have largely discarded religions that they were raised with, right? You ask people, I was raised Methodist, I was raised Presbyterian, I was raised Catholic, but they've like let it go. They don't practice it. They don't think about it. But then there's and then what they don't realize is there is a void of, and there's still a desire to be like,
Well, we're built for worship. Like I think
Yeah.
like human beings like have an internal like framework for worship and religion, right? But we fill it in with other things
Yeah.
that are not you don't think it's a religion, but it actually
Yeah.
manifests
Right.
that way.
Yeah.
People don't really buy this idea, but it's
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
you still want to interface with like the spiritual
Yeah.
realm, but some people, I think you're right, they fill it in with things they're worshiping that
don't
are
even
not,
know they're
that they
worshiping
don't
them.
even know, like whether that be like
but everyone
sex
has
or money or
everyone has an internal like pyramid, right, with
Yeah.
something at the top,
Yeah.
and it's like you better meditate on like what that is for you, right?
that you
Because-
serve.
Yeah. Well, the psychoanalyst Eric Fromm, he said it's not a matter of religion or not, but a matter of which religion.
Right.
And even
Great
if you
quote.
think you're not religious, your lack of religiosity is your religion. It's like
Right.
atheism is just as much of a religion as any other religion.
Right.
And the
Right.
idea is like, there's also the kind of cliche saying, if you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything.
Yeah.
So it's like if you don't have some kind of bedrock for your values, for that kind of value hierarchy in your spirit, you are untethered. You are not, as they say on Twitter, based. To have a foundation in
Right.
some kind of value.
Right.
you know?
Right.
And so then we see like people who have largely let go of the traditional religions they were raised with, maybe because those religions weren't like explained well to them, or they didn't have experiences through them that they felt were profound or connecting them to God. There was just like something they weren't getting there, right? Or maybe it was as simple for me. It was like, well, the rest of the culture seems to be discarding this, so I guess we just don't need it,
Yeah.
right? And then you fill it in with other things, and
End up in hell real quick.
And
Yeah.
well, but for us, I think a lot of it was like the New Age stuff, which I
Yes.
think you
I think the new age is actually the mainstream culture in the United States right now. I could be wrong. Maybe I mean,
Yeah.
I need to see numbers on it, but I'm seeing this like growth of like new age practices, especially among young women, and this looks like like tarot cards and like occultism and like witchcraft. I know a lot of women my age calling themselves witches, like and being dead serious.
And you're saying these things are kind of filling a hole?
Yeah,
of
I
some
think
sort?
it's filling in for a religion that's been lost,
Yeah.
like a religious framework that's
Yeah.
been lost, and it's kind of this like blend. It's like really incoherent, like this blend
Yeah.
of like a lot of different religions and practices, like pagan practices, like Hinduism, Buddhism, astrology, like all of these things,
Yeah.
crystals, like.
Yeah.
But like even people who are not explicitly practicing some of the New Age practices like crystals and meditation, all these things, are there's the messages, like the theology, so to speak, of the New Age is creeping into the mainstream, where you see even like different corporations pushing messages like love yourself or serve yourself, like serve yourself, or
Right.
like you are enough, like all these ideas that like all there is to serve is the self.
Yeah.
And that we are already like whole and complete and
Yeah.
don't have anything to do to work on to get better, to be more holy.
You're great just the way
You're
you
great
are.
just the
You're
way
a
you
little
are.
goddess or god.
Yeah.
Like this like weird self-worshipping
Yeah.
thing that's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I think to touch on that in a second for sure, but in terms of religion that we have in our culture now, that is kind of a religion of no religion. I mean, think about football. Think about sports.
Oh, yeah.
Think about live music, where it's like people will say that they're not religious, but they'll go to a concert and they'll chase a band around, and it's like, and they're having a mystical experience in the audience, and it's like, and they claim not to be religious. They're having a transcendent experience listening to that music.
Yeah, they're facing
And-
the altar.
Yes,
Yeah.
and when you're at a football game, it's like you're watching gods clash against each other, and you're
Yeah.
building myths around these things.
Yeah.
And in terms of a lot of what you might call the new age is we live in a very globalist culture right now, where it's like, I think in the past it was easier to just kind of have one religion that you're adhering to because there wasn't as much information exchange, and now because we have airplanes and we have the internet and we're bombarded with so much other religions, that I think the new age is an attempt to integrate so many religious claims that we're now having to sift through. Like in the past, you never had to sift through like a Christian in England in like the 1200s. You didn't have to contend with the ideas of Buddhism
Right.
or Hinduism because they never even
know
came
them.
across your radar. So what we're seeing now is people being confronted with so many religions, and they're thinking the proper approach is to just take a little bit of all of them and kind of making like a scarecrow religion.
Yeah.
where they're just kind of
Frankenstein.
patching together.
Yeah.
Which I think that has a lot of good intention behind it. But I think some of the negatives of that is when you're just kind of picking what you want from all different religions, you tend to ignore the aspect of those religions that hold your feet to the fire. Where it's like, say, in Christianity, you can kind of ignore, say, sin or something like that because it's an uncomfortable thing. It's like, what did G.K. Chesterton say? He said that Christianity has never been tried and found wanting. The problem is that it's never been fully tried, you know?
Oh, interesting.
So it's the idea that, like, yeah.
It seems like when people pull together their cafeteria religion, where they like just pull this and this and that, they don't take the parts of the religions that would require you to like do something hard. Like self-sacrifice, or like actually
celibacy. Look at your sin, like confront your pride, like confront the places where you're not being virtuous. Christianity has a big focus on virtue, which necessarily means confronting your failings, and the ways you aren't reaching a high standard. But I think so. The New Age religion, I think, by getting rid of those like standards of behavior, and saying instead, oh, just love yourself, you're enough as you are, it's like flattened things. Right. And so then, whereas traditional religions do have some sort of like hierarchy of values and behavior, and this is better than that, and whatever. So the New Age religion flattens, and then we start to see that in other ways in our culture as well, right? Like we're seeing the erosion of standards in almost like every realm, whether it's architecture or art or
I'm so
fashion.
glad you brought that up, because I think it's through art, like through religious art and iconography, which you guys obviously know a lot about, is through art, through a religion's art, they are depicting and kind of figuring out what the proper ideal is. Like a saint is someone who lived so purely in a certain way that they kind of crystallized like a way of being that you can look up to. And I think that offers a lot of guidance, and we need that. We need like a tip of the arrow, you know, a tip of the pyramid to kind of point to. But
the New Age doesn't give you that, right? It's kind of like the idea is sort of that, like, I don't know what the idea of like
they have saints, and it's like it tends to be, well, it depends like what New Age circles you're in like psychedelic New Age circles. The saints are like the man who invented LSD and like the man who first synthesized MDMA, and they like paint icons.
But it's not about like his behavior, how he lived his life.
Yeah, it's materialist. It's just that he found a material, and it's
right.
and that's cool.
And I understand that sentiment, because I think in a materialistic culture, which America has been so much, psychedelics gave a materialistic culture a material way to have a mystical experience. You know, like, so it's like, exactly. So it's like, of course, if this is a bridge to the mystical, which I think has been so robbed from our culture. Like I think that modern kind of 20th century American culture has been so robbed of personal experience of the divine. And I think that the introduction of psychedelics has given people this connection to something that they never knew existed. Like, I was an atheist for most of my life until I tried psychedelics. And it shows you that there's another side to the coin.
Right.
There's something else there. But there's also like, there's a great saying, and it's spirituality is the fire and religion is the fireplace.
Right.
And you need some kind of container for this spiritual fire. And I think in the 1960s, what we saw with the proliferation of psychedelic culture is like Timothy Leary with Molotov cocktails of spirituality in the form of LSD, just throwing it at things. And what we saw was a massive spiritual wildfire. And even Alan Watts said the 60s would have been so much more fun if it had some discipline, if it had some structure. Right. So it's like this spiritual fire that you get from these powerful substances, it needs some container. It needs a container.
Right. And it needs boundaries, and I think
boundaries and psychedelics dissolve boundaries.
And that's the problem. So then people do psychedelics and they say like, oh, there's no good and evil, it's all one. It's all the same. Like, everything is one.
That's one of the most common takeaways.
And then people will think they've had some profound insight and then live that out, start to like adopt that as their principle and their view of reality and then live that out. And the thing that's so dangerous about that is like when you get rid of the concepts of like good and evil, good and bad, like, and you just say, oh, it's all the same and it's relative, then you just open the door. I mean, you totally get rid of the fireplace, to use your metaphor, and it's just a wildfire.
Well, you're not
right?
pointing towards anything.
Right. And you you actually lose a very key mechanism by which to navigate reality and to navigate your spirituality, because there is good and bad in the spiritual realm. That's like the whole thing. And even people that do psychedelics seem to know this. So like, I had a bad trip.
Yeah.
Or like I saw something that freaked me out.
There are efforts to reframe that as just difficult. And it's like, well, sometimes it's bad. Sometimes you're getting a bad download. Something is pointing you in a bad direction. Like something that you heard while high is giving you poor advice. And like a lot of people don't have the discernment because they don't have the framework of good and bad to know that it was bad.
And reject something.
Yeah.
And that's what great art should do. Great art should sift through the chaos and point to the transcendent, the proper transcendent. And how do you know what is the proper transcendent? I think that if something stands the fires of time, like you can judge how true something is by how long it's lasted.
Yeah, and I think it's fruits. Like, what kind of fruit does it bear? Is it rotten fruit or good fruit, you know? And I started to see, a lot of, like, rotten fruit in the new age. I was like, a lot of these people, like, aren't having kids, and they have, like, multiple sexual partners, and their lives are kind of messes, and there was even, like, a lot of poor hygiene and stuff, and I was kind of like...
Well, if you look at religion as something that, from an evolutionary perspective, that a true religion should confer some kind of adaptive advantage. And what does that mean? If you believe these ideas, meaning if you act them out, you become more likely to pass your genes on to the next generation. So obviously some kind of ideology that would lead you into procreation obviously would fit would grow and proliferate. But then there's the idea of like, does this religion spread memes? Does it help you proliferate memes? And I think one problem is that memes spread faster than genes. So it's like some of these religions, they start quick and fast and spread super quickly without being put through the evolutionary fires, of time. And is it making you reproduce and procreate? And is it lasting intergenerationally? Sometimes I think some modern quote unquote religions can spread memes very quickly, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're evolutionarily advantageous.
Yeah. And like, so if you look at like take Christianity, right? Like I would say, and so I've lived my whole life in the United States. I would say like 9 out of 10 people I talk to when I'm like, how are you raised with what religion? It's always some form of Christianity, whether it was like Protestant or Catholic or whatever. That's always the response. But then like they're not practicing it, and then it's like our birth rate's like super low, and people seem like super lost. And it's like the thing that got you here
is being discarded.
Is we're like, we don't need it, and then now everyone's just adrift.
And you need something that makes you want to be hopeful about the future and makes you want to have children, because what we're seeing even outside just of Christianity, the YouTube channel After School did a great video highlighting population collapse and people talking about this. There's population collapse happening in almost every country in the world. So it's beyond any kind of particular region. Like almost all countries are experiencing a population collapse. And why could this be? What kind of religion would make you believe that it's not worth continuing your species, And I think some religions, when understood properly, have safeguards against this. Like in Christianity, Mary, like, she knows what kind of suffering Jesus is going to go through. Pieta by Michelangelo is a great depiction of this, with like Christ's tattered, tortured, suffering, dead body in her hands. And even though kind of she knew what the fate of Christ would be, she still chose to bring him into the world. It was still worth giving birth. knowing the amount of suffering your child is going to go through. And what we hear now in this quote unquote modern religion of no religion is that the world is so rife with suffering that it's better to not even have kids at all.
Yeah, not be
and
born.
that's the Mephistopheles kind of perspective in Faust, right? Where he's like, the world is so rife with suffering that it'd be better if nothing existed, and that's the perspective of Satan in that one story. And I think that is kind of what is creeping in to a lot of these religion of no religions today. It's an anti-human sentiment.
Yeah, and it's also like something that like Christianity gives you, or that Christians believe, is that there is eternal life, right? That you continue after death, that there's life after death. And so if you don't have that belief, and like all there is this realm, this world, this material world, and you look at it and go, well, it's imperfect. Well, it's not great, or like there's all these things wrong with it. People suffer. It's not perfect. I have to work hard. It's difficult to be alive, to be here on this earth. And there's no eternity. Then like, what's the point?
Yeah.
Right. Instead of what, traditional Christianity gives you, which is the idea that there is eternal life. There is something after, and that your whole, time on this earth is, at least in the Orthodox faith, is about theosis and becoming more like God. You'll never be God, but becoming more like Him and working through your sin and working out your salvation daily, as St. Paul says.
The suffering has meaning in Christianity. Meaning. It's not just, they're suffering, so don't do it.
Right. Yeah. And there's another side to it, too. Yeah, it's like, and after death, there's something else.
You just touched on something I think that's super critical, which is like I've watched people and kind of how they live their life and how they act out their morality, and particularly in the political spectrum. And I think that you need to, well, you don't need to, but I think it's optimal to believe that your actions have consequences that extend beyond your death.
Yeah.
Because if you believe it's just lights out when you die, you feel like you can get away with as much as possible while you're alive, and you will face no kind of, you'll believe you can get away with things. And I think in some kind of ultimate metaphysical way, you can't get away with anything. Jordan Peterson kind of talks about you can't get away with anything. In all my years I've seen you can't get away with anything. And I think that, when these belief systems and these religions that make you kind of feel like your actions have great consequences to what happens to you after you die. It's almost like a check and balance on your morality. This is why our president swears on the Bible. Yeah. And this is why we have not yet had an atheist president. It's not because like we're just so Bible thumping and we're not evolved to like some kind of greater form of atheism where we can just reject theology altogether. Like, we want to know that our politicians, when no one else is in the room, they believe that they are too subordinate to a higher power. Because if they feel like they're not, they're going to be in a mindset where they feel like they can get away with anything. And I think that's what we're experiencing right now in our culture. A bunch of godless politicians who feel like they can get away with anything because they're not necessarily afraid of any metaphysical consequences to their actions.
Right. And that's why when people like, I don't know, people like want to like totally get rid of like any sense of God or religion when it comes to the state. And it's like, but we say one nation under God for a reason. Like, that concept of there being something higher than you that is not just the state is really important. Yeah. Like, so it like, because if there's not something higher than the state, then the state is God, and that's the highest thing. And we see this in communist countries, etc. But like, there has to be something above you that you're accountable to, that we're all accountable to as individuals. This is the other thing. Attorney General Barr had a really good speech he gave. I forget where or like what, but I could like find it and link it in the description, where he talked about how the Constitution was made for a religious people because it gives us all these broad freedoms. Yeah. But then you do need some sort of internal check on your morality, where it is between you and God, your behavior, and you do believe that there's an eternal life for which you'll be accountable for your actions here on this earth. And you only get to enjoy broad freedom when you have that like check on yourself, right? It's when people become incapable of like handling freedom, and their morality's like off the charts and anything goes, that the state then has to like step in, right? Like if you don't believe that it's the right thing to do to like stay with a woman you impregnated and marry her, right, and you just leave, then the state has to come in and like fill that gap, right? And then you need a bigger state. And like you could think of like lots of examples, or like abortion's another great example. Like if you don't control who you have sex with and when, and then you get pregnant and you don't want to be and you abort the baby, it's like, well, then you need the state to like allow you to do that, right? And to give you those allowances of those services because you didn't like internally like check yourself and your behavior, right? So it's just
yeah. And in the United States too, I think it's really interesting to think about like kind of the place of God in this country, because we do have the separation of church and state, while also at the same time they're saying it was made for religious people. How can we reconcile these things? And in the Constitution, the verbiage that is used is nature's God, or the God of nature. So this is a kind of the Enlightenment idea of God, where it's like, hey, you can't disagree with it, because what they mean by God is the sum total of all natural forces of the universe, like our creator. That's where we derive our rights. And no one gave you your rights. Your rights are intrinsic to you as a human being in this universe. And because they weren't given to you by humans, they cannot be taken away by humans. And this idea of, I think that also kind of causes some accountability too. Like if there is some kind of structure to the universe that we are kind of adhering to, you need to follow that, or else you're bending reality. And I think it's incredibly prideful and naive to think you can bend reality, because in my experience, you can't without bad consequences.
You can try to manifest your own morality.
Yeah. And sometimes I think a lot of these modern kind of religions, you could say too, is it's kind of influencing people to believe that they can make their own reality.
Manifestation kind of stuff. It's like, I've had people say like, oh, I know this person, she can literally just visualize and step into what she visualized. Like people really think that like their willpower is creating what they get, or like receive. It's often materialistic. It's like what they receive, they visualize and manifest it. And I think they think it's coming from themselves and their like power of will. And like there's some truth to that, but it's,
you don't want to take it too far. Like obviously, yes, if I like decide to like eat Cheetos every day and like sit on my couch, I'm not gonna like be living in a good reality.
You're manifesting obesity.
But right. But so like it's not to say, but it's also like we don't 100% control the world, or else it'd be, if I was God and manifesting everything, then a lot of things would be different. Like if it was my idea of what the world should be. And
this idea too of like kind of making your own religion, like that's getting very popularized. And that's something I used to think you could just kind of make your own religion. But now I'm starting to think like one human lifetime is not long enough to make a religion. You know, if you look at religion, and I've come so far. Like I used to really kind of be an atheist, and I used to think all religion was a delusion that allowed us to deny mortality. You know, I was really influenced by Ernest Becker and the denial of death, and that all religion was just kind of this illusion that is made to comfort us. But now I'm realizing religions are an intergenerational construction that allows you to house spiritual fire. Like the fireplace we were talking about, like each generation is a brick laid in that fireplace. And when you have a 2,000-year-old religion, you have an ornate, carefully constructed fireplace made by the labors and suffering of all those who came before you. And are you just going to carelessly denigrate that?
Yeah.
Are you just going to say,
set a bomb to it?
These 2,000 years of people attempting to answer these impossible metaphysical questions, they were all wrong. And now I'm right. Now I figured it out.
I've been here for 25 years.
And now I have my own religion. It's like, get the fuck out of here.
Arrogant.
You cannot make your own religion.
No.
It's like you're not alive long
and the
enough.
powerful thing about the church, like the Christian church, the ancient church, is that there are depictions on the walls of saints and people who have come before you. The idea is that you're in communion with the dead and the living, and like it's very, very powerful to experience and see all these like you're in communion with the people, like it's called the body of Christ, like the living people around you. But then there's also a lot of, reverence and depictions for the people who've come before you, who've been a part of that religion. So it's all around you. It's very out of time.
Yeah.
There's like an idea that like when you're in church on Sunday in the Orthodox Church, it's on the 8th day of the week and it's out of time. And which makes sense to be in the space with like, dead figures that are alive in a metaphysical sense with you. And you can measure your behavior against them.
Right, they've completed their lives. And, and
they've
look at
gone
what
through
they did
things that are way worse than what you're
my
going
gosh.
through.
Oh
like
my
if you look
goodness.
at the lives of the saints, it torture and like being thrown in scalding cauldrons of water and like having their limbs cut off and like horrible things that they endured for their faith. So
a critical quote for me is that tradition is not the worship of ashes but the preservation of fire.
Right.
And I think a lot of people in our modern age, they look at religion as kind of these like kind of relics, like
and look now, do you feel like we're in a very fiery culture anymore? Like we
No.
got rid
It
of
feels
tradition
dead.
and now things feel dead.
like
my
all we have
God.
is sequels. Like
We
there's
have-
not a lot of creativity.
there's
Nothing
nothing new
new
in
is
the
being
culture.
created. Everything's an appropriation.
there are
of
people in
appropriation.
other countries who can't even comprehend the suicide rate we have in our culture. Like there are kind of small tribes in Africa that like there's no suicide because they have community, they have their religion, they have a sense of belonging and transcendent value, and there's just no suicide. Suicide is such a kind of unnatural thing. Like there's apoptosis, which is programmed cell death, that is the closest thing to suicide in nature. But the fact that humans will kill ourselves, I think that is a spiritual sickness that you need to be intelligent enough to have that sickness.
We're uniquely conscious among animals.
Yeah.
So like with that unique consciousness comes a lot of need for like a map and like a mapping and help with our consciousness and ordering of our consciousness, and religion gives you that. And if you don't have that, it's easy to quickly feel like, why am I suffering so much? Why is this place so overwhelming? I feel like I have nothing beyond the right here and the right now. And in Christianity, there's the idea is that the world is fallen, right? Like we're not in total union with God anymore like we were in the Garden of Eden. So it's always going to be imperfect here.
It took us out of union with God. You mentioned the Garden of Eden.
Yeah.
The trick of the serpent was you can become as
God. Pride
and that
comes
took
before the
us
fall.
out of union with God. And I
Yes.
think you've got to be very careful with some of these things that are telling you can be
you
God.
are God.
I
You
have
are
news for
God.
you.
Yeah.
You're human. You're not God. You're human.
Yeah.
And that's that brings to the kind of story of Lucifer, which is God's perfect angel, who then kind of believed that he could dethrone God, and he didn't want to submit to God's authority, so to speak, and he wanted to place himself higher than God. That's when Lucifer was cast into hell and went through the transformation into Satan. That pride is the cardinal sin,
right?
And that's what takes us out of balance with nature, believing that you can be above it,
Right.
That you can just choose to like. I remember I had this idea that I could just like make myself into what I wanted myself to be. Like when I was living in San Francisco, there was everyone there is so into like polyamory and open relationships. And I was like, oh, well, I could like just make myself be okay with that. Like it makes logical sense. So like and then at the end of it, I was just like, I was not created for that.
Yeah,
I was
it's humble.
like,
You became humbled.
Yeah,
right?
like I can't create
choose
myself into being someone who is okay with polyamory because of having children. You need paternity certainty. You need like women pair bond with one
And
man
your
and
entire
raise children.
lineage was not
Was
polyamorous.
And it's like
All
and
the
also,
foremothers
It's
were
biblical
not poly.
too. It's like how we were made. Like and that's very clear in the Bible. Like one man and one woman. It's not like And so
in the Orthodox Church, there's a strong focus on the idea that humility is the only path to God. Like being humble actually unites you with God, because it's like thy will be done, not my will be done.
Right.
And that I think that is just like lost in our culture. It's all about like you do you, girl. Self-love. Actually, in Christianity, you're not really supposed to love yourself. You're supposed to love God. And,
something outside of yourself.
Love things outside of yourself. That would help you be a parent as well, because then you would like put
the
your
idea
needs
of
before, secondary to children. Like so, it's a productive and generative idea. Like to put down your own self-will for higher things.
And a lot of the things that we have today that are replacing quote unquote conventional religion is kind of propagating this belief that everything is one and you are one with everything. And that takes away your relationship with God, where it's just like this idea that you are God, or sometimes even that God is within. It's like that kind of makes you very solipsistic, and it makes you believe that God can be found completely within your kind of own experience, I guess. And it takes away this idea of having a relationship with God, because to have a relationship with something, you need to be separate from it.
Exactly.
So it's like when you take away this separateness from it, sounds so counterintuitive, because it's like, I'm not telling you to be separate from God, but also at the same time I am.
It's a paradox.
Yeah.
It's like you are separate from God and your goal is to unify with God.
Yeah,
theosis. It's a paradox.
Yeah, so
but it's also like you see so much in our culture today that people want to get rid of distinctions, right? There are a million examples of this, whether it's like cultural distinctions or distinctions between genders or like whatever it is. People want to get rid of differences, or even like people talk about like income inequality, right? And granted, yes, too much of that can be a problem, but like to have everyone have the exact same income, or like just getting rid of like distinctions among people,
the flattening
of everything.
And you can see it in our architecture.
But like when you
wow,
yes, literally flattening our architecture.
Boxes.
And it's like creation needs distinction. Like it needs this and not that. You know,
and distinction gives you character, and identity is a character, and it's like that's textured and complicated, and doesn't look like another thing. But people are offended by differences, so we have to flatten everything, because no one can be offended by just like a flat box. And if everyone looks the same, maybe we'll all get along. And this is the idea.
Yep.
Yeah, you just touched on something there that was really interesting, which is its relationship to architecture. And I think modernism, or even actually postmodernism, is kind of erasing. When you have any kind of architecture that has any kind of design or beauty to it, it tends to be speaking to a lineage or a tradition. And when you make all these things like just flat and modern, you are erasing the rootedness of that tradition in which that art emerged from. And it takes away your roots.
It's actually homelessness. It's actually homeless architecture. Like it's not
homeless architecture.
Yeah, there's no identity. Like to the architecture we're building now, it could be any place. You could be anywhere in the world, because it's removing tradition and identity and the character. Yeah. Because with those things comes an individual character, or like a distinct character. That's what culture is and art is like form, right? And we're removing form from everything to its most basic and like not uninteresting form.
Well, and something that's like weirdly ironic is a lot of people now, I think they do kind of like worship nature. Like they don't worship God, they worship nature. But if you look at old architecture, a lot of the patterns and designs were mimicking nature.
Oh yeah,
they're like the Corinthian columns have leaves on them, right? Like and if you go to San Francisco and look at old Victorians, there's like cornucopias and like all these beautiful things built into the architecture. And it's like weird to me that a people that is so a lot of people are very like into nature still today, and yet they're okay with these like just boring flat box buildings.
Well, I don't know. Yeah. I don't know if those people are actually okay with the boring flat box buildings. Like, I don't know who's okay with the boring. I think people just don't even have the awareness for it. They're just like take it for granted. Like, this is what the world looks like. Right. They're not thinking about like how things used to look, and they don't have that. Those memes are very powerful when you put up like a modern piece of architecture next to a traditional architecture. It's like then I'll post these and people will be like, I didn't notice this before.
Yeah, like, and most people,
but you feel it, but you might not know where the feeling's coming from. Like you might not know that you're not feeling great.
Now,
in this flat box.
Is this flattening? I guess we can use architecture as an example. Is that an intentional erasing of tradition, or is it some kind of subconscious egregore type thing where it's happening without some kind of intentional push behind it, or it's just we're losing it's both.
It's both.
Yeah.
It's just like
but
people
what would be the motivation?
What
would the motivation be to flatten this architecture?
To not be
offensive
offensive.
Anyone.
To not be offensive.
Yeah, because it's like, and this is the other thing, having a standard of anything means that if something or someone isn't meeting the standard, it could be offensive.
Well, so but there was also this idea that like beautiful buildings were bourgeoisie.
Exactly.
And it's excluded. This stupid idea that like it was not good for poor
yeah.
people feel excluded from this. It's like actually that's free beauty
Free
for
art.
for poor people.
Yeah.
Why do you
that's
think
one thing you
so?
can give poor people, poor in spirit, right? Like
Yeah.
people who are poor in spirit.
I
and money.
think there's some connection there between so many homeless people being in San Francisco, which is beautiful and has beautiful architecture.
Yep.
And people who are really down and out
Yeah.
spiritually they flock there. You know, there's a lot of reasons why, but like maybe they're being fed in some way by the beauty of the architecture.
It's because it's like, well, at least it's warm and beautiful here.
Yeah.
But there's also there's this thing. It's interesting. Like when you say this thing is beautiful, you are implicitly saying that something else isn't.
not.
You're
Yes.
a hierarchy. You're
Right.
creating a hierarchy,
Exactly.
and that's just hierarchy. It's just the way the universe
Yeah.
works.
Yeah,
I'm
it
sorry.
is, yeah.
But I think sometimes we feel like, oh no, we don't want a hierarchy, and
'Cause we might fail.
Well, we might fail, but that means things are lower than the other
we're
things,
uncomfortable.
and
That's
and,
not
and
nice.
compassion. That's not nice. And our
Right.
compassion guides us away from that. And I think a lot of these things are diseases of compassion.
Yes, exactly.
You know?
Weaponized compassion.
Weapon-
And it's
Weaponized
almost like
compassion.
weaponized femininity too, because
Yeah.
the feminine is compassionate, right, and cares for the weak and the vulnerable, and
Yeah.
all of that.
And we need both
And
of these
you
things.
need it,
But
right.
like, are
Like-
we in balance?
Right? No,
Absolutely
we're
not.
not. And yeah, so now any time in our society that you impose a standard or hold to a standard or say that there should be a standard, people get upset, right? Because they think it's mean. Because if someone's not meeting it, then they think, well, oh, you're making someone feel bad, right? And like it's like we see this with like women's fashion, even like there used to be a standard of female dress that was very tightly bound up in the idea that women should be careful about how much skin they show, right? And that's connected to all sorts of reasons for controlling human sexuality and things
Yeah.
like that. But like there was a standard, and now if you impose some sort of like standard on women for how they dress,
Oh, they hate it.
They hate it, and it's like, and you even see like, you know, schools getting pushed back for having like a dress code or like whatever it is. When I was
Yeah.
younger, I didn't understand why that stuff was in place because
Yeah.
my highest value was freedom. I was like, we should just be able to do whatever we
And you
want.
didn't have a lot of experience in
Yeah.
the world.
Like-
Well, now we have a lot of weight to this value of liberation,
Right.
And I think that sometimes, like people shedding away this old culture, it can feel liberating,
Yes.
but sometimes liberating. Like you think you're becoming more free, but sometimes more freedom isn't the solution. You
right.
know,
And-
because it's like okay, this is really interesting. Think about like a shark tank a shark cage that you go into the ocean. You're inside of a cage, so in some way you are caged and you're trapped,
And not
but
free.
not free. But also there are sharks
You're safe.
circling the tank,
Yeah.
so you're also safe.
Yeah.
And sometimes you'd be like, I don't want to be in this cage anymore. I want to be liberated. So you open up the cage and you swim in the wide open waters. Wow, how free, how liberating. But then a shark comes
get eaten.
and chomps, and you just carelessly liberated yourself
Yeah.
from the thing that was keeping you safe.
And the
Yeah.
thing with liberation too is it's like, well, okay, liberation means what exactly? It means that like I know what's best for myself and like well, I can do what I want as long as I don't hurt anyone else, which is such a gray area. Like I won't even get into that. But like, and the thing is that you often don't know what's best for yourself in a lot of contexts and times in your life. And like this is where like the elder wisdom is supposed to come in and be like, well, look, we have more experience than you, and like we have this norm in place to like protect you. Like that's the shark
here's
cage,
why.
right? It's
Yeah.
like, we know there are sharks out
Yeah.
there, but like if you just have all these like arrogant, prideful young people, right? Like literally celebrating being prideful, that they're gonna get hurt, like because they just don't have the framework.
It's Chesterton's fence, right? He says, you know,
Yeah.
if you're walking along a path and you see a fence,
Oh, yeah.
don't take it down until you understand why it's there.
Yeah.
Right. And I think, and there's with freedom as our highest value, again, like this is another reason I think we have this flattening of everything is because having a standard is at odds with freedom, right? Or can feel at odds with freedom because it's like if I want to like dress like crap and balloon up to 500 pounds and eat
Yeah.
whatever I want, that's my right? But to have the standard imposed means you no longer feel free to like
Not
fall.
to eat
It's a
it,
cage,
yeah.
and it's a judge.
Yeah,
it's
it's
a
a
And people
judge.
don't want to feel judged.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
being
we-
judgmental is wrong.
Right.
And Christianity is often being accused of having a judgmental God.
Yeah, don't judge. We
When
hear that all the
really,
time, don't
I think a
judge.
lot of it, like you can think think of these kind of judgments, so to speak, as spiritual bumper guards.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of like you're bouncing around through the chaotic
I
thing of
want
life.
to judge my behavior. I want to judge if it's, and I think the better word that Christians often use is like being discerning, right? Like I am discerning if that's good or bad, and that is making a judgment call, right? But like it's just, you would never like tell somebody not to make a judgment call as to whether or not it's like smart to like leave their car unlocked at night, like in the middle of a busy city or something. Like it's just, you're making judgment calls all the time.
Yeah.
Like, right. But it seems like when we, endorse that idea explicitly, people like lose their minds. And
I think a path back to sanity in our culture is beauty. Like Roger Scruton, who I love dearly, he said that in the absence of organized religion, the only kind of redeeming value is beauty. And it's like when you take someone who's an atheist and is not reproducing because they think the earth is just so horrible that they think it's already hell and it's not worth continuing. Zoe, that's our kitty.
She would like to podcast as well.
It's like you show a person who thinks like that. You show them a beautiful piece of art, and I don't care what they believe, they can't argue with it. You can't argue with something that's truly beautiful.
It speaks for itself and it doesn't need explanation. That's the thing about real art. I don't think needs a ton of explaining. Maybe a little bit, but like modern art often is like scribbles on a canvas, and you'll read the artist statement and it's this like long, like gibberish academic mumbo jumbo, and
they're like trying
an
to
actual
convince you
piece
it
of art.
means something.
Yeah, like La Pieta, like you don't need it, you just know.
Yeah.
It points to the truth.
Yeah, it points to the truth.
Like
it kind of speaks for itself.
Yeah, like modern art that's like scribbles on a page, right? They have to like write
theory
this
behind
long
it.
thing to convince you that it means something. It's like it doesn't mean anything.
So does that mean, do you guys think that we have some kind of innate sense for truth?
Yes. Absolutely. Children, you can see it in children.
Yeah,
they
call
like
you on your
they
stuff.
have this like subconscious right and wrong thing going on.
And
like,
so
inner
something
compass.
that is something that is beautiful to the degree that it speaks to this innate sense of truth, you could say.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think something is beautiful if it points to a higher order.
Yeah.
If it elevates you and uplifts you and like takes you out of the fallen world, right? This like imperfect, broken, like fallen place, and takes you to a place where things seem like wholer and shinier and more put together and like reverent.
Yeah.
That is art. And I think artists have a duty to actually make beautiful things. I don't like this idea, like a lot of people call themselves
Put a
artists
urinal
and
on
they're
the ground.
not, or piss Christ, or like, the urinal on the ground, or like, these kinds of things. It's like, that is a performance, and it's a shock. Like, it's I don't want to call it art. It's like shock. You're trying to shock people and like,
it's like visual
provoke
litter.
them. Yeah. It's like litter, and like it's visual trash, and you're just trying to get a reaction out of people. You're not trying to elevate, uplift them, and make them comfort
and touch
them,
something
even.
true and
Or
transcendent.
point to the divine, right?
Point
Well,
to
I think something that is so interesting, and there have been scientific studies on this, is when we look at a human face, we have a intuitive sensation on how beautiful it is relative to how in alignment it is with the golden ratio and the Fibonacci sequence. Like I think a lot of what we call sacred geometry, or these geometric proportions that all great artists have used in their depiction of human anatomy, I think geometry is like this kind of language of the universe, so to speak, this kind of like perfection, and our bodies are kind of are mapped on that. And to the degree we are in alignment with that divine ratio, we express what is subjectively experienced as beauty. And I think that we have this with art too. It's like if it gets very close to this kind of transcendent structure of the universe, then we perceive it as beautiful or truthful. It's like something
you're getting
beyond
close to God.
Yeah.
And is this getting close to
the creator?
Yeah.
Like what made everything.
And then there's this idea of subjectivity and moral relativism, where it's like something is only beautiful if your culture has conditioned you to believe that it is beautiful. And the thing with sacred geometry is like, I don't care what culture you're from, the Fibonacci sequence is still the Fibonacci sequence.
Right.
Math doesn't care about your fucking culture.
Yeah.
It's like there's something transcendent to it. And this, I think, social constructivism is one of these kind of really toxic ideologies that we're experiencing in our culture, and moral relativism kind of comes from that, where it's like everything is right and nothing is wrong, and therefore we're just kind of in this chaotic mess where you just have to pick apart how you've been toxically conditioned by whatever patriarchy you're a part of or something like that, and it makes you dispense with everything.
Yeah, and the idea is that like the only truth. Well, the idea is that there isn't truth, that the only thing that's like real is just what your culture is conditioning you into, what a group of humans has said is beautiful or right or wrong or whatever, instead of the idea of things being universal across all of humanity, like morality, right? Or,
the reason I think this is being pushed is if you can convince someone that the truth is just a construct, then you can construct truth.
You can do
and
anything
tell them that it is truth. If people believe that truth is something transcendent of human endeavors, then I don't care what you do or what you tell me. I know the truth is higher than you.
Right.
But if you convince people that there is no truth and truth is just a social construct, you can then put yourself into the position of creating truth for other people, or which is a form of control.
Right. If truth is just relative to what the times or the culture or whatever happens to be going on at that moment, then you can convince people to do anything. You can control them. I'm trying to think of like a recent example of that, but
I guess like the What is a Woman documentary was a pretty good example of that. Like Matt Walsh asking people like, do I exist? And people were like, he's like, if I said I didn't exist, would you think that was true? And people are like, if that's you think it's true, and it's like, like, wow, you're like really overriding all your own senses here. Just because of this idea of like, well, who's to say what's true and what's not? Right. And it's like, actually, you are to say what's true.
And with that documentary too, the escape from the reality of male and female is really interesting. Like coming from the field of evolutionary biology, really. One of the things you study most often is kind of the gender roles in different species. Like you look at birds, you look at peacocks, there's clearly differences between the male peacock and the female peacock. Even in all primates, there's sexual dimorphism to varying degrees. And you can understand a lot about the species by studying how the different genders interact with each other. It's just, and you see in a lot of psychedelic art too, where people I think are touching on something so innate and natural, this idea of the divine masculine and sacred feminine. And I think they're touching on something real there, that in almost like some kind of mathematical way, the male and female exists. And now we're kind of being told that there is no such thing as male and female. It's like this is so outside of any kind of tradition of biology or science that we've ever had, and I think it's because it's a result of this moral relativism and social constructivism.
You don't see that in like places without mass media, really.
Yeah.
Like in remote tribes, they have sex roles.
Yeah,
like,
but it's because they're closer to nature. The closer to nature you get, the closer to the proper order of the universe you are.
Yeah,
but I think it also ties back into the fear of standards and hierarchy we were talking about, because like if like masculinity is something real, femininity is something real, or maleness or femaleness or whatever, then there's got to be like a best way to embody that. Like, what does it mean then to be a good man or to be a good woman?
Yeah.
And if you and our culture currently is afraid of that, and is afraid of what that means, because it might mean limiting your freedom.
Yeah.
It might mean that a good woman isn't promiscuous.
Yeah.
So then I no longer have that freedom.
Well,
so
I
get to do whatever I want.
If there's a standard, then
maybe you don't get to do whatever you want.
Well, not only do we have ideals of what it means to be a good man, or do we not have ideals of what it means to be a good man or a good woman, we don't even have the ideals of man or woman.
Yeah, it's gone that far.
Yeah, it's gone that
well,
far.
Who's even to say that someone is a woman?
Right,
no one
right.
the question.
Yeah.
And I kind of wanted to bring it back to like architecture and like how moral relativism plays into like architecture.
I was going to say I've walked through cities with people, with friends and different people I've known, and I'll like point out the beautiful architecture, which is always the old stuff that was built before the Second World War, right?
Really.
I point out, and it's incredible how few people have noticed it, but also like sometimes they'll be like, oh well, like the new stuff like doesn't bother me, right? Or it's interesting or something like that, and And
I don't buy it.
I don't-
I just think they're lying to themselves. I
Well,
don't know.
I think it might be something where people could be like out of touch with how they feel about things.
Yeah, disembodied
Because if you,
floating heads.
right? Because
kinda.
if you
interesting,
live
that's up
in-
here.
If you live in a town or city where it's just all like say brutalist architecture,
Yeah.
right,
DC.
like all of it, and there's nothing beautiful or redeeming around you, you're gonna start to feel that if you're not totally cut off from your heart space, right? You will start to feel it. You will start to like, I don't feel good. I'm like depressed.
You just don't know
I'm not-
where the bad feeling's coming from.
And you even know, like, city people are known for wanting to, like, escape to nature, right?
Yeah.
Why? Maybe because our cities aren't green and beautiful and, like,
Yeah.
reflecting nature, and then they have to
Yeah.
escape and get out.
I got
Yeah.
crucified on Twitter once by all these like atheistic like right wingers, like these like bodybuilding kind of like BAP people, because I said that like I thought that maybe like rates of depression were connected to our crappy building, and like you know, and my Catholic friend backed me up and was like, ignore these people, Amy. They're like GDP worshipers. They don't understand that like the person working in and out every day in that strip mall is feeling the effects of working day in and day out in a windowless box that is just like literally with a drop ceiling and fluorescent lights. You know, like people are going to feel that whether they're aware where the feelings are coming from
Well,
or
I
not.
mean, it's intuitive. It's like, what do we do to prisoners? We put them in a
in
box.
boxes without anything to look at.
Yeah.
Like,
It's like,
and the
that's
thing
what-
about truth too, one of the ways you can know it is true is like if you act out these beliefs, does your life get better or worse?
Right.
And I think a lot of these things we see that are getting worse and worse is because we're acting out things that are not true.
Yeah.
And we're not addressing that.
Yeah.
And then people, I think mental illness and like is really people's bodies like being symptomatic and being like, you're not in line with truth. You're not in line with truth. It's like an alarm system, really. Like depression and anxiety. At least it was for me. Like it was an alarm system that like I was not in line with like objective truth, and I was suffering for it. But I don't know. I don't know how you gently tell people that, but like
there is some like truth is metaphysical.
yes.
Right?
And I wish people just knew it's like okay to be wrong. Like it's okay to be wrong. Like there's humility in it, and you'll actually like feel better after admitting that you're wrong. But like people are so prideful, right? And there's like so much like hubris and arrogance right now with this like self-worship, like new religion, what have you been calling it? Like a religion of no religion. Like it makes you into like a little god. And if you just knew that like it's okay to be wrong, you might feel better. Actually, like
there's a relief that comes with, you know, acknowledging that there's creator and created and distinction and good and evil, and like there are like not to say there's no gray in life or anything, but like there is a relief that comes with letting go of. I found, 'cause I used to hold all those ideas of, oh, we're all one, everything's all the same, there's no right, and there's almost like it like feels better to acknowledge reality, right? Like once you accept it, it's like, oh, okay, like like it is a fallen world.
You
It's
might
not
feel
even
better
good.
if you tried to humble yourself and like work with what is here and what you've been given, rather than fight it all the time and try to like bend things into the form and the will that you want. Like it's actually a lot more of a comfort, and you get a lot more grace from kind of surrendering a little bit and being like, all right, I didn't make the world. Like I didn't make me even, you know, like so
Well, that's why they say like there's like communism is the political order of people who are like mad at God, right? Because they're trying to control everything and try to force
Shape
it into
reality
reality into my image.
Like it's a nice idea if everyone was like the same in certain ways. It's like maybe in our heads that sounds like a nice thing, but like it's simply not the case, and you can't force that into existence.
One of the first things that
break everything.
one of the first thing that communism does is destroy religion. Is destroy God, because they don't want you to have any other God higher than the state.
Right.
And that is this idea of replacing God with humanity. Humanity with humans.
Like, we'll pull the
Didn't
string.
communists they killed priests and nuns and like raided Orthodox churches and things like that. Like absolutely. It was such a threat.
During the Chinese Cultural Revolution, they just destroyed all of the beautiful Chinese traditional
And even
culture.
during COVID, you kind of saw this like state versus church thing going on that was very tense, where like churches wanted to stay open and they wanted to, you know, like not follow certain rules, and the state was creeping in and like, some churches like were able to withstand that and some weren't, but it's the same. History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes, right? It's like
that's when the
very
Constitution really did what it needed to do, like during COVID, when the Supreme Court ruled that the governor of New York could not close down church because of COVID. It's like, hey, what if someone would rather die than not be able to be in communion with God? It's like, when did we become so afraid of death?
Yeah.
You know what?
Well, again, you get rid of eternity and eternal life, then you're afraid of death.
Then you're afraid because you think it's all done.
Yeah,
you
think
it's
it's all done.
over.
You won't do
This is
anything
all
to
I
not
have.
die.
And
Yeah.
again,
That's all I have.
I think a religious culture would not have had the reaction to COVID that ours had.
I know.
And
well, they didn't.
Not only a religious
Where?
culture.
The Amish.
Oh, right.
I
Amish.
spoke to an Amish guy down at an Amish market
Yeah.
near me about COVID, and he's like, we knew from the beginning, like, this is not what they're telling us it is. And they said the fear didn't work on them.
Yeah.
And I think the fear really only worked on people who are not properly oriented towards the transcendent.
Yeah, and it's difficult to think about the fact that you're going to die, but then I think it's an Alan Watts quote, and he's he's a little controversial to me now, but he said that like thinking about death is like fertilizer for your life, like it grows flowers for you, and it's a good thing to ponder, like if you're going to die. And I think people are avoiding that, and they're hyper teched out, and they're distracting themselves with any means necessary, because like what would that mean you had to look at if you thought you were going to die and then maybe like actually face some sort of like judgment or have to account for things, like how would that affect the way that you live? And that's painful and difficult work, I think, that people feel unsupported in doing. Or they don't know how to do it.
And religion in its proper function, religion should be a preparation for death. And it should be a way of kind of thinking differently about death. I think psychedelics, people taking psychedelics and contending with their mortality of people who have terminal illness, like that's been shown with LSD. And I think that, like religion should make you more prepared to die. And whatever religion you're acting out, if it makes you more fearful of death, or if it's just making you like, we can't be so afraid of dying that we're willing to give up living. And I think some people are so afraid of dying because they're not properly oriented towards the transcendent that they just stop living. And what's the point of being alive if you're not going to live? You might as well be dead.
There's this beautiful practice in the Orthodox Church. Is it the Panakita? Where we pray for the dead. Like that people are even like caring about your soul and your after like church members have died. There's like a service for them and their souls. We pray for them. We say their names and like that. I thought that would maybe help comfort people who are like afraid of death. It's like, well, people are still like looking out for you even when like you've passed on. It's just like I want people to pray for me when I'm dead as well, and my soul and everything. But we're just so far removed from any of these traditions, or like people have no idea like how to manage their feelings about dying.
It was all connected too, because like you mentioned the birth rate earlier and how there's population collapse happening. So you have societies of older people now. The average age in the United States and most countries is way older than it used to be, right? So that also, I think, was contributing to the idea that the young had to sacrifice for the old, because there's just like way more older people, right? And then obviously getting rid of the idea of eternal life and like all of these things, I think just like all contributed to this really kind of draconian response to COVID for a long time, which I'm glad we're out of now, but I was kind of worried it would like continue forever. Well, I think that this was a great conversation, and I'm glad that you came on our show.
Good to see you, Tyler. Tyler lives 3 hours away from us, he's visiting, and we just thought we'd record. And
well, it's a great time talking to the Mystic Sisters, and I think we always get far with a lot of these questions, and I'm sure we're going to turn all the mics off and just keep talking.
And drinking whiskey.
Whoever's listening and watching this, you caught like a window into
how we always
are.
Cheers.
All right, thank you guys.
Thanks, Tyler.
Thanks for listening.